The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. The Paranormal Podcast is also brought to you by the Tennessee Wraith Chasers Fan Cruise. And you're going to have a lot of fun if you go on this. It's going to be on the Norwegian Sun, March 5th to 9th of this year, 2018. And you're going to get to meet Chris, Scott, Brandon, and Mike, and also special guest Stephanie Burke, psychic medium. It is going to be a great time, and it's put on by our friends at Holiday Maker Travel. Please do check it out at twcfancruise.com. That's twcfancruise.com. And thanks, Holiday Maker Travel.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And today the topics are UFOs, and we have two great guests to discuss different aspects of the question. First up will be Xaviant Haze, and we're going to talk about the possibility of ancient aliens in the Bible. Xaviant has a recent book out on the subject. In part two, we're going to talk to Philip Mantle, UFO researcher and author over in the UK, and he'll be joining us to talk about a couple of cases, the Rendlesham Forest incident, of course, and his take on what many call Britain's Roswell, and also an interesting case in Pascagoula in the United States. Very interesting stuff. And we'll be right to it after this. Please give your consideration for this quick favor.
iPhone and iPad users, help us keep the Paranormal Podcast at the top of the charts. Go into your Apple Podcasts app right now and hit subscribe. We appreciate it. Now on to the show.
Well, our guest today is a repeat guest, and it's going to be very interesting because we're going to talk about ancient aliens in the Bible, evidence of UFOs, Nephilim, and the true face of angels in ancient scriptures. And we're glad to be joined again by our friend Xaviant Haze. He is a researcher, teacher, and archivist of ancient manuscripts with a keen interest in lost civilizations, ancient aliens, ancient giants, and the myths of the pre-Diluvian world. He is the author of 10 books, including Ancient Giants of the Americas and Aliens in Ancient Egypt. His free online library, XaviantVision.com, I love that name, is home to one of the most complete collections of metaphysical, spiritual, and alternative history books and podcasts in the world, with links and resources to all major works in the field. He resides in a haunted house. That's a bonus in South Beach, Florida. Xaviant, I'm thinking of you as I'm looking out here in Ohio. I'm looking at the snow, and you're nice and warm down there in South Beach.
Yeah, well, it's been a little chilly because it's been like 50 degrees, so I don't want
to be the horror.
The horror. Yeah.
So, ancient aliens in the Bible. Now, there's been a lot written about ancient aliens and the Bible. What did you want to do differently, or what did you want to bring to this area of study with this book?
Well, basically, I got a hold of Mauro Biglino's work, who was the Vatican translator. Now, what happened with him is that he got he did over 20 works for them and was basically their top translator. But he got tired of kind of, promoting the lie, which is making everything. He had to translate it so it sounds like it's ethereal,
right,
or a vision or a dream, when actually the true words of what they're talking about are describing concrete happenings, like real events, physical people, physical beings. So he kind of just said, you know what, I'm going to translate it as it says. And he did that. And I think one of the manuscripts was translated and I made its way to the forums, and I got a hold of it, and I was blown away because, here it is. Like, what more proof do you need, right? The top translator for the Vatican saying, hey, this is what they're talking about. And they're talking about aliens. So I kind of got a hold of him, was able to get, his blessing, pick his brain a little bit, and he wrote the foreword to the book. And so I kind of used his guide as the work to basically do something fresh and different, which has really never been done. And it's just it blows. It's so mind blowing, but it's so obvious to what they're saying,
right?
Well,
to me, that is an extremely different take on this. You have somebody from the Vatican saying, hey, there is something to this ancient alien theory, and the texts point that out, and I'm the translator. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And then the fact that you actually got him to write the foreword from his book, I mean, that is just incredible to me. So that congratulations to you. Now, is it his standpoint? Is it your standpoint that the Vatican knows the truth and they're covering it up?
Yeah, they know. He definitely, he got fired, and he basically, was kind of exiled to Torino or wherever, and he's pretty much will never work again. But yeah, I mean, the extent of the lie is pretty deep. I can imagine what they actually really have as terms of artifacts, and what is in their libraries that we can't see and we're not reading. So I bet it's pretty severe. And to think, because I mean, it's a business, right? All religions, they're cults, right? And it's to scare you with fear and to make you afraid. And I think the report was released last year that religions, combined brought in about $1.4 trillion just based on the religion. So anything that makes that amount of money and has that amount of control, they're going to be concerned of upsetting the apple cart.
I love the chapter 1 title because anybody that's a horror movie or sci-fi movie fan specifically will know one of the greatest movies, and I say that very facetiously, was Plan 9 from Outer Space. I think it was Bela Lugosi actually died in the middle of filming, and they didn't change anything. They just changed actors or something. But your first title here is Planet 9 from Outer Space. What is Planet 9, and where does it play into all of this?
Well, I'm glad you got that because, Ed Wood is one of the great, movie directors, and just that movie alone. I mean, that's great stuff. So I kind of play on words. Planet 9 would be, I guess, Planet X.
Mm-hmm.
And, this goes back to ancient times as well. And even, I guess, Sitchin talks about this. Whether it's Nibiru or not is irrelevant. We know, and science has kind of been pointing out the fact that there is a sort of a Planet X involved.
Now, just for people who maybe are a little at the beginning of this journey rather than in the middle of it, Planet X, Nibiru, can you give us just a thumbnail sketch of what those are and a little bit of the theory behind it, just as a little primer for maybe people who are not familiar with the terminology?
Well, Planet X is basically a planet that comes around every so often. I think it's maybe 3,500 years, and it's in our solar system. And when it comes around, it supposedly affects our planet and Mars. And science has kind of been reluctantly emitting and not emitting it for about 30 years, but they found, based on just like the way like vibrational, they can find in vibrational sequences and discover things that are not supposed to be there. Well, recently they found, I think from Caltech, using the vibrations and looking at the wavelengths in space, that there is another planet out there within orbit. So the fact that there could be an extra planet that they want to hide or they don't want to emit, mm-hmm. is a big deal. And if that, according to the ancient sources, once it gets near us, causes some sort of calamities and earth changes, that's a major point for concern. So the fact that there is this planet that has been talked about thousands of years, and now kind of science is looking at it like, hey, there actually might be a planet X out there. It's pretty interesting.
And as we go, I'm going to go through some of the different chapters. So it is interesting you talk about this Planet X. That's a fascinating subject and one people should check out in the book. You talk about Adams and Eves in laboratories. The idea of Adam and Eve in a laboratory. Is this were Adam and Eve an experiment? Were there multiple Adams and Eves that were being viewed? And I've never thought about Adam and Eve in that context, because you think of Adam and Eve being watched over by God, and I'm not saying that I necessarily agree or believe this, but if God were an alien, that would be very much what we talk about, alien observation of humans and possibly experimentation. Where do Adam and Eve come into the picture?
Well, first of all, you got to separate like the true God, which is a metaphysical element, which is not what they're talking about in the Bible.
Okay.
In the Bible, they talk about the gods, right? There's never really God. It's always plural. So if these gods had the ability to genetically alter DNA and kind of be mad scientists, so to speak, that would make them God-like, but that wouldn't make them God. So it's easy to see how they have been misinterpreted. Now, as opposed to the Adam and Eve story that most Westerners and Christians are familiar with, we always kind of, because we have the paintings and we have the symbolism, and it's always a man and a woman. It's always like two people, right? And then they go out in the garden, and then they get everything happens from then.
Right.
But if you read, Genesis and even the Sumerian tales, they're describing sort of experiments, and we know this because the Adam wasn't a person; the Adam was a race, right? The Adama, on Earth, like which Earth, ancient Earth was the Adama, right? So the being on Earth would be like an Adam, So they're kind of describing certain races that they were experimenting with, and these weren't the first. They talk about a whole bunch of experiments that had failed before they even got to the Eves and the Adams. And even there's, I believe in one of the passages talks about a reptilian race they had experimented with as well. So it's very interesting to think that they were genetically creating humans, and if in the passage that says, I made man in my own image, right? So if that was true, that means it would look like us. So they're trying to tell you that it's possibly a humanoid alien that was experimenting and doing these sort of works, which would make sense. So you have the Adam and Eves, and basically, if they were in laboratories, like I guess the word paradise comes from like a Persian word, like paradis, and it's really describing an enclosed structure. So they're kind of talking about facility, which would make sense. Now, when these were completed and released, and they were kind of out there in the open, in the presence, what happened within was, according to the book of Enoch, the angels, who were, basically you have a platoon, because the word angel comes from the Greek emissary, right? It basically means just emissary. So,
right.
So the angels are basically soldiers, and each one, according to the book of Enoch, had a specific duty. Some were scientists, chemists, botanists. Some taught weaponry. Just like in Star Trek, if we send a fleet out, everyone's going to have a specific duty. Not everyone's going to have the same title. So it's kind of that way if you look at the angels. Now, according to the book of Genesis and ancient Sumerian, even ancient Egypt, you talk about, one of the angels kind of was infatuated with the Eves, and they were strictly forbidden to do anything, but they ignored their superiors and they started having sex with the Eves. And this brought forth the race of giants. And once they had the giants, there was a concern because giants were cannibalistic, they were causing problems. And this is essentially why the gods chose to kind of destroy the creation and start over.
Giants. The thing that's interesting to me when people talk about giants, and we had Dr. Barry Downing on, and he said when he talked to Christians, and he started way back on this thread back in 1968 in terms of ancient aliens and the Bible and so forth. And he's, if I recall correctly, actually a minister. And he had said that he got in trouble with all of the Christians. The liberal Christians got upset because he took miracles literally, like they really happened. And then the conservative Christians would get angry with him because he was attributing this to some of these things to aliens. So he was kind of stuck in the middle. I think it's always interesting when most people read the Bible and it says giants. It's like, oh, they're talking figuratively. It's like, I believe in the Bible, but it's a metaphor. But you're here to tell us there were actually giants in this time, and there was an ancient alien connection.
Right, because if you read the scripture and if you go according to what Big Lino says, how it's supposed to be properly translated, it's a history book, literally. So the fact that they were genetically engineering a species, and they engineered a species that actually gave birth to giants, and then we have giants wandering around, and then they were trying to get wiped out. But after the flood, they weren't wiped out because we know they still have them. You could read in the Bible. Where they're concerned that there was over 200 tribes of giants still remaining in the Holy Lands. Now this brings us to Moses. When Moses is going to the Promised Land, and the scouts come back and say, "Hey, we got a problem, boss. The lands look good or whatever, but the Akim are there," and the Anakim were the giants. So they were, we got to kill these giants, and basically everyone's familiar with David and Goliath, of course. So. It literally lists the tribes of giants, who was the giants. For instance, the giant in Hebrew is Raphaim. So King Og of Bashan was the last giant king, right? And when he died, his bed, which was like 14 feet long, a 14 feet long iron bed was still in existence in the lands of Syria. And there's a passage in Deuteronomy that describes that his giant iron bed remains to this day. So it was a tourist attraction in his time, thousands of years ago, right? So, why would they make that up?
Good question. Our guest is Xaviant Haze. The book is Ancient Aliens in the Bible, Evidence of UFOs, Nephilim, and the True Face of Angels in Ancient Scriptures. And we'll be back right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And keep listening, because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, let's say this is the first time you've ever heard the Paranormal Podcast in the last 15 months. Let me explain what Gaia is, because it is well worth repeating. Gaia is the streaming TV service if you are interested in topics like UFOs or metaphysics or the paranormal and the great questions of life. They kind of leave the comedy series and the more dramatic series to the other streaming services, and they focus on the topics that we love. And the best thing is that you can get Gaia on all of your devices, thousands and thousands of hours of high-quality video content you can get on your Roku, your Apple TV, your iPhone, your iPad, your Chromecast, your Android device, your Fire TV, your computer. If you are listening to me, you can watch Gaia. And quality is really their hallmark. They only produce the best programming with some of the biggest names in these topics. People that you might see a snippet here and you might see a snippet there on some of the other cable stations and stuff. But with Gaia, you get the deep thinking, the deep thinking behind their theories and behind their work. They're not kind of set towards sound bites. This is for people who really want to dig deep, and Gaia does it. Gaia curates, they create, and they bring you the best in 40 topics on video. Now, every week they send me a sheet talking about the latest and greatest stuff that they have going on. And they're launching new series and all of these great things. And it's just fascinating to see how they've even grown in the last 15 months or so they've been working with us. If you were a member this week, you could watch things like Beyond Belief with George Norrie. And he has Freddie Silva as a guest this week. Ancient Tales of Death and Resurrection, researching the lost art of resurrection. Freddie Silva has uncovered the spiritual truths which have been buried in ancient sacred tales of death and rebirth, once only held for the ordained. These are now being brought forth for all to have a personal experience of the soul and spiritual evolution. Or maybe you're interested in something like quantum entanglement. That's what they'll be talking about on Deep Space Season 2 this week. And they have guests like Michael Sala, Daniel Sheehan, Michael Barra, Richard Dolan, Peter Lavenda, David Childress, some of the biggest names. And they just have them all of the time. They have shows with people like Graham Hancock, just so many great guests and great people who are involved with Gaia on so many fantastic topics. Another one, Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock and Emery Smith, staged alien abductions. And Emery Smith gives us a new perspective on what's really happening during various abduction scenarios. Is the public the subject of mass mind control operations instilling fear and confusion? Well, tune in, and you could tune in if you were a member of Gaia. So let's get that taken care of. Here's how you can do it very economically. First of all, go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. That's a page they've set up especially for us. And there's some shows there you can watch. Don't have to log in, don't have to do anything. You just go over there, you watch them, and get a flavor for the high quality that Gaia will give you. And then they have a little button that says sign up. Click on that, and you can have the opportunity to sign up for your first month for only 99 cents. And there's some great offers there too, otherwise, but the 99-cent one, that's a very non-threatening way to do it. And I think that after that month, you're going to say, now this is what streaming devices were made for. That's Gaia. Gaia is great. You're going to want to check it out. They've been so supportive of us. They really, did a lot to keep us going in 2017. We had a lot of behind the scenes things going on that could have sunk us. Good things, changes, trying to make things better and so forth, our IT structure and all that. And with the support of our sponsors, and Gaia is our biggest, we couldn't do it without them. So I want you to thank them by 99 cents, and that's not much. So go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. I know if you like this show, you're going to love Gaia. Check it out. Thanks, Gaia.
Bringing you the strange since 2005, we return to the OG of paranormal podcasting himself, Jim Harold.
We are back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Xaviant Haze, and he is the author of the recent book, Ancient Aliens in the Bible, Evidence of UFOs, Nephilim, and the True Face of Angels in Ancient Scriptures. Xaviant, you talked about the many-faced God. Now, in the Bible, we're familiar with God, and then Jesus is the Son of God, but he's part of God. But you say there are many faces of God. What did you mean by that?
Well, that's, again, a play on the word from the Game of Thrones. And it kind of means, well, again, the true God is the metaphysical, which is private and personal to each one of us. We all have a connection to God, right? And it's kind of based on the laws of the universe and karma. What goes around comes around. Things like this, reincarnation, which all ancient religions believe before is basically beat out of them. So I think it's important to kind of separate, the physical, metaphysical God, as opposed to, the gods of the Bible or the God in the Bible. Because, if you're reading it, it's a lot of, there's a lot of angry stuff going on. God's vengeful, violent, right? And these things seem to be kind of put in there, not in a metaphysical manner, right? So, we have to kind of separate and learn what they're actually trying to tell us. Because if the God of Israel and whatever God that was doesn't seem like a metaphysical entity, it wouldn't be so destructive and forceful and vengeful. So it's probably safer to say that whatever that misinterpreted God was actually a commander or whoever it was left over that was still in charge, still pretty much hell bent on making sure whoever was left of his platoon was guiding the people and Moses and everyone else for a specific reason. And it's all about being afraid, right? And that's kind of what it's describing and kind of what the chapter is trying to explain, especially when in the case of Moses, which is very interesting. I mean, Moses had, and of course, the story of Moses you could find in ancient Egypt as well, and kind of bastardized in Sumerian forms and everything else. But, the fact that we have someone who was led by basically a spaceship, at night talks about the fiery pillars. In the daytime, it was the metallic cloud, right? And then we have the whole instance with the Ark of the Covenant, whatever machine that was, because why do you have to wear a hazmat suit?
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes no sense. Like, you got to wear a hazmat suit before you talk about God or any of this. And then the whole part where he's kind of, every time God comes, there's always a earthquake and, kind of like what the Von Doniken described, so eloquently back in the day. It was, why is the God associated with earthquakes and thunder and smoke and arrival on mountains and stuff like this, right? That's a metaphysical God. That's impossible. Misinterpreted God in a spaceship, for sure. So, Moses goes up and he has to hide in the cleft, and he watches the ship go by and, make sure he's protected. And then when he goes up there for 40 days, remember, he comes back with the veil on his face because his face had got burnt. Was that burnt from radiation? What happened? What happened to Moses where he went up to see God and he got his face burnt and he had to wear a veil? So, even with the tabernacle, anytime the God came down to talk to Moses, he had to do it away from everyone else, and he had to set up a little area for him, for the pillar of smoke to come down and for his communication. So it's very, very odd that a metaphysical God would require any of these things.
Very interesting perspective on that. Now, this surprised me when I saw you have a chapter in here about WikiLeaks and the Vatican. Now, where does Julian Assange come into all of this?
Well, I mean, WikiLeaks kind of released these emails of, I think, Podesta and I guess it was Edgar Mitchell, kind of trying to prove or get help with the Vatican to release information that they had. So we know it comes out during the WikiLeaks that we have these communications. You can read the emails. Edgar Mitchell, I think I'm pretty sure he was one of the people that walked on the moon. He was 100% convinced.
Oh, yeah.
And they all, and usually a lot of them are. I mean, even Buzz Aldrin, who knows, he's kind of slipped up a few times. He even talked about one of the megaliths on Mars. So they're all pretty well aware of this extraterrestrial phenomenon. And that's why they wanted to kind of threaten or kind of nudge the Vatican to be like, hey, we know you got the top telescopes in the world. We know you're already kind of secretly announcing things. Like, even when they fired Bigligno, they were kind of like, well, if there are aliens, that just means they're God's brothers too, right? So we know they might know more than they're letting on to us. But again, how are they going to react when it happens? How are they gonna slip in there that there are extraterrestrials, but because it'll just crumble all sort of religious infrastructure. The Abrahamic religions, right? Islam, Christianity, and Hebrew, Judaism. They're all basically reluctant, or if they admitted there was ancient alien presence and there was extraterrestrial genetic engineering, and that we were basically created by aliens for whatever purpose, whether it was to mine for gold or to have sex with or whatever it was, it pretty much makes their whole religious infrastructure null and void, because that's a shared history that belongs to all of us. So if we all kind of realized and got together and spoke about and accepted that, there were ancient aliens and we were created for that. So why are we gonna fight? What's the point? There's no point to destroy each other over religion or Jerusalem or anything else when it was just based a bunch of ancient aliens flying around, and then the prophets were kind of they're only prophets because they hitched a ride on the spaceship.
Now I have to ask this, and this is maybe the most controversial part of the book. And I'll give everybody a peek behind the curtain. We're recording this before Christmas, even though it may air after Christmas. But around this time of the year, and you don't have to send me an email. I know Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, that it was taking a pagan festival and repurposing it. I know that. But anyway, anyhow, as we get ready to celebrate the birth of Jesus here in about 10 days as we record this, you talk in the book about the concept of an alien Jesus. Do you believe Jesus was an alien?
Well, according to what the scripture, pretty much, yeah. There seems to be some sort of hybrid going on there, some hybrid stuff, because we have the angel that visited Mary, right? And we know that he had these sort of powers, and it would make sense that if the alien presence that was still around, they were pretty much on their last leg and they weren't as powerful as before, and the kind of world had moved on without them, so to speak. So I think maybe the whole Jesus thing was kind of their last ditch effort to kind of maybe have some sort of control. Now, and of course, this is not to say that it's real, because there's no proof, obviously. And we have the cult of Mithra, and we know Osiris and Buddha and Krishna, and there's like a million Jesus type stories. Osiris, right? That's basically astrotheology. However, it's not to say that there couldn't have been a Jesus, especially in an ancient alien text with the hybridization and the kind of things that he was doing, with the backstory as well. But the issue is, for all his alien powers, he was no match for the evils of men, right? So to me, what makes the story of Jesus timeless is the actual story, and the power that gives, and even the Bible, the parallels, and the message of Jesus is important. And I think that's why it's remained, and that's why it's important to kind of believe in him and to believe in what the story is trying to tell you. It's to make you a better person, right? And it's giving you the keys to the kingdom to be Christian is to be Christ-like. So, and it's a matter of just being nice, being good, the golden rule, do unto others as they do unto you. These are all positive, good things that everyone should aspire to and should do daily. Every day of your life, you should do good and service to others, right? And once you're doing this, watch everything else open up. So I think that's why Jesus is important, and I believe this is why, for me to write about it, I wanted to make sure I got that in there, but I still had to kind of put it in context with the ancient alien theory and even look at every aspect of it. But I think the story is what's timeless, and if it's good, there's a reason for it.
So, I mean, I have to believe, even though you've done a ton of work and you've done 10 books and you've been studying this for years and you have your website and so forth, that these revelations via this translator from the Vatican has probably changed your perspective, maybe your beliefs on things. How has it changed in this book, this project? How has it changed your kind of thought structure on all of this?
To me, it just confirmed what I'd already known, and it just kind of validated the work I've been doing and continue to do. And I'm a storyteller, so to me, the important thing is the writing, to be able to entertain and to be able to tell the story and to take the information and make it readable. That's number one. But as far as the knowledge and just kind of piecing the puzzle together, it's had a tremendous impact. And but the thing is, there's never an end to the eureka moment, right? It's never ending, because now we got to look at the Vedas and the ancient Indian texts, which everyone ignores. And because everyone's in this Abrahamic cult, especially in the West. And if you look at the ancient Indian texts, you're going to be like, whoa, okay. Now here's a culture that is basically unconquered, hasn't changed. It's a shared collective history. It has nothing to do with, you can only read this book because this is from God or whatever, right? Don't read anything else. There's a reason why they say they don't read anything else, right? So, then you look into the ancient Indian stuff, and they kind of have no qualms talking about aliens and flying vehicles and ancient atomic war and genetic engineering. So that's valuable as well. So kind of piece everything together, and then you have an understanding. But then you're like super crazy, and how you're gonna, you need to go see a psychiatrist, right? And then what are you gonna do? You send him to the psychiatrist. So there's the society puts on everyone that this is insane, this is crazy, or whatever. But they're actually the crazy ones, not us.
I think people that are willing to ask questions and maybe consider the fact that we don't know everything, I think we're the smart ones. Not that we're always right, but at least we're willing to admit that we don't know everything.
All you need to know is you'll never know it all.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that's very, very true. A good point to conclude our conversation with. Our guest has been Xaviant Haze, Ancient Aliens in the Bible, Evidence of UFOs, Nephilim, and the True Face of Angels in Ancient Scriptures, has been the book we've been talking about. And Xaviant, the important question, where can people find the book and also find everything else you do?
Well, the book is always best to get on Amazon, and you can find it in your brick and mortar, I guess, Barnes and Noble and whatever still exists. And me, I pretty much kind of remove myself from internet and social media and trying to disappear, but I'm on Facebook, and if anyone has questions, or you could always contact me there.
Very good. Again, our guest has been Xaviant Haze. Ancient Aliens in the Bible is the book. Xaviant, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
A very interesting discussion with Xaviant, and that is an interesting question about ancient aliens in the Bible. One up for much debate. And next up is Philip Mantle. He is going to talk to us all about Rendlesham Forest, about the case at Pascagoula, and more right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by the Tennessee Wraith Chasers Fan Cruise. It's coming up March 5th to the 9th, 2018, and you were going to have a good time if you are a fan of the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, shows like Ghost Asylum and Haunted Towns, because you're going to get to interact and cruise with Chris, Scott, Brandon, and Mike, plus Also, as a special guest, you're going to have Stephanie Burke, a psychic medium from TLC's Kindred Spirits, and I think that you are going to love it. Mike and Wendy over at Holiday Maker Travel, they've done quite a few of these different cruises in different themes, UFOs, ancient mysteries, now the paranormal. I was lucky enough to be on one last year, and they really do a great job of breaking down the barriers between the cruisers and the speakers. You really get to interact with them. You get to have meals with them. You get to break bread with them. And it's such a great time. A great ship you'd be going on. This is the Norwegian Cruise Line's Norwegian Sun. You'll be sailing from Miami to Key West, Grand Bahamas Island, and Nassau, Bahamas. And also, Mike and Wendy have private shore excursions in both Key West and Nassau, and plenty of time to enjoy Grand Bahama Island on your own. Now, get this. If you are a fan of this show, this is kind of time to squeal because you're going to start off the cruise with a meet and greet private cocktail reception with Chris, Scott, Brandon, and Mike from the Tennessee Wraith Chasers, and also Stephanie Burke. And the thing that they do at Holiday Maker Travel, they include exclusive private shore excursions that are not available on board. And you'll be able to join the TWC team and Stephanie as they tour the haunted hotspots in Key West, followed by a lunch at one of the oldest buildings there. And in Nassau, you'll join the TWC guys and Stephanie on a brew tour tasting and end up at the Pirates Brewery for lunch. I mean, how cool is that? You're going to be hanging out with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. Now, the special group price includes the 4-night cruise, port charges, the shore excursions, cocktail party, and more. And don't forget, this is still a cruise vacation. It includes all of the great things you expect with a cruise: meals, entertainment, activities. But the folks at Holiday Maker Travel, well, they add something very, very special, and they do a great job of handling all the little details. So now there's only one thing to do. You've got to book your spot. It's coming up fast. TWCFanCruise.com. That's TWCFanCruise.com. Put on by our friends at Holiday Maker Travel. They always do such a great job. They're great people, too. And you can go to TWCFanCruise.com and find out all about it and get on board. I know they have some slots left, not a great deal of them, so you better hurry up. But I think that you are going to want to make your reservation. TWCFanCruise.com to sail with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers on the TWC Fan Cruise. I think you'll love it. Thanks, Holiday Maker Travel.
Now back to the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Philip Mantle is on the line, British author, publicist, lecturer, broadcaster, researcher of UFOs, and publisher with the Flying Disc Press. And today we're going to talk about a couple of his recent books from his publishing house, UFO Contact at Pascagoula and the Rendlesham File, Britain's Roswell. But before we do that, I want to welcome Philip and thank him for coming on the show. Philip, thank you for your time today.
Good evening, Jim, and it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now, I have to ask you, anybody that I'm talking to about UFOs today, regardless of the topic, the first thing I have to ask them, in December of 2017, there were these big reports here in the States via the New York Times about UFOs, the U.S. government actively having a program at least until 2012 and probably continues to have that program going, according to the article. And then the gun camera footage from the U.S. Navy pilots from, I believe, 2004 in the San Diego area. And the first thing I ask people is, what's your reaction to all of this?
Well, I think it certainly caught most of us by surprise, the fact that it was published in the first place. I think it's unique in that, this admission. But, there have been rumblings down the years by people, most of whom were dismissed, I must say, that stated that it was their belief that within the U.S. government, perhaps in conjunction with a civilian facility, they were studying UFOs officially. One of the gentlemen who made that statement was Colonel Holt. Now, Colonel Holt was the deputy base commander, of course, at RAF Bentwaters back in December 1980. And he made that statement. Now, we're not sure if that was his opinion or whether he actually knew something that perhaps he'd got hold of somewhere. But when you look at what he had to say, he was pretty much spot on. And so the revelations, I think, in the press caught most of us by surprise, although there were some rumors circulating on Facebook for a number of weeks before the article was published, saying that there was some kind of big news coming via the New York Times. Exactly what, with no idea. They were suspecting perhaps the rock star Tom DeLonge might be involved somehow because he'd been making his own noises. But however and whatever, it did take us all by surprise, I think, Jim.
I would agree, and I think that you hit it on the head, this idea that really one of the big surprises was the idea that it would actually get published. That was what was fascinating to me, even more so maybe than the revelations in the article itself. Just the thought that the New York Times, the gray lady, the supposed paragon of excellence for American journalism, would publish two very strong articles in support, I think, of the at least the facts are in support that there is definitely a UFO phenomena and that the U.S. government is studying it. And I think that was the biggest surprise, even more so than the contents of the article.
I would agree, Jim. I mean, I think the New York Times is renowned for its skeptical stance on the subject down the years when it has commented. But however, I think when it has commented, it's commented on mainly things that have come from the civilian UFO research community. But with this announcement, it's very difficult to comment in a negative way, when you've got this information. And of course, the New York Times is renowned for breaking, sensational news stories, factual ones down the decades. So, this is another one that they can add to the list. And I think even they were surprised by the attention that the article received. And, in this day and age, Jim, I might be a bit cynical, but newspapers don't sell like they used to do because of the internet. So it certainly won't have done their circulation any harm either. That might be a cynical approach, but nonetheless, like you said, they did take it very, very seriously. And we should applaud that. Really, we really should. But yes, the publication that this appeared in did surprise us as much as the announcement itself.
Now, on to these books that your company, Flying Disc Press, has put out, and one of them about a event that those of us who have followed UFOs are very familiar with, or somewhat familiar with, at least, the Rendlesham Forest incident. But I want to start out with one that maybe we're less familiar with, the book about UFO contact at Pascagoula. Can you tell us about this sighting and why you thought it was worthy to publish a book on?
Yeah, I mean, when I started in this subject, Jim, there was no internet, and if you wanted to find out more about the subject, basically it was books down your local library, or a few magazines that were scattered around, or you joined a local UFO organization, which is exactly what I did. And I remember I started back in the late 70s, and I remember reading about Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, Pascagoula, Mississippi, October the 11th, 1973. And it was just, for me, a standout case. Dr. Alan Hynek was on site within 48 hours. And it had all the hallmarks of authentication right from day one, Jim. For those that are unaware, Charles Hickson was 42 years old. Calvin Parker was 19. On the date in question, they went fishing. It was one of their great loves in life was fishing. They loved to fish on the Pascagoula River, just off Highway 90. Not an exceptional place, it's just nondescript. And, they'd been fishing for a while, not had much luck that evening. So they decided to go a bit further up the riverbank and try their luck once more. And just as luck had it, Charlie caught a fish, and he thought, at last. So he turned around to pick up some more bait to try again. And he was astounded at what he saw. He saw this strange craft descending that was giving off a blue light. His immediate reaction was to turn around and look at his buddy there with him, because he was much younger. And when he turned around, he saw Calvin's face, and he said it's a face he'll never forget. The expression on his face was one of sheer terror. Cutting a long story quite short, an opening appeared in this object, which didn't quite touch the ground. It wasn't on the ground. It was just above it. It appeared to be hovering. And from this, three beings appeared. They were humanoid in shape, although their hands had kind of pincers rather than fingers. They had stubby elephant-like feet, and their legs never moved. They didn't walk. Their head didn't have any eyes or nose or mouth, but it had sort of protrusions that came to a point. And they floated above the ground towards them. So they didn't walk. Two grabbed Charlie, one Calvin, and they took them towards this craft. And at some point, Calvin believes he passed out. And so Charles is the main witness in that respect. And he recollects being on board this thing. It was held firmly, and he calls it an all-seeing eye, Jim. It was this round thing, and it kind of went all the way around his body from top to bottom, as if examining him. And he was that scared. At one point, he remembers saying to himself, "Okay, if you're going to kill me now." That came into his head. But Charlie was also a veteran of the Korean War, and he fought in a number of major battles during the war. So he called on his military training, and he thought back to one of the instances during the war where they were pinned down by the Korean forces. And his commanding officer said, "Don't panic, don't wait, just don't worry, we'll have a chance to get out of here. So just bide your time, we'll be able to get out of here." So Charlie then kind of zoned in on that thought, and his reaction was, "Okay, I'm just going to look for a chance to escape. I'll just stay still, don't do anything, and I'll get out of here." And of course, they did, but they were just taken, put back to whence they came, and this ship departed. And, Charlie's first reaction again was for his young friend, who was literally screaming. I think in the end he had to slap him, like they do in most of the sort of cheap movies. They slap the screaming woman, back from the 1950s. And they were both literally petrified. So they staggered back to their car that was parked in it, not too far away. And their first decision was to tell no one, to just go home, tell no one, because they thought no one will believe us. They'll think we're all mad. So they set off driving along, and I think it was the younger one. Calvin said, "No, we can't do this. What if that thing comes back and does this to someone else? We have to warn them. Or perhaps it's the beginning of an invasion." So this is 1973, remember, no mobile phones. They found a phone box, what we call here, I think you'll call a phone booth in the US.
Yes.
And they telephoned Keesler Air Force Base, which wasn't that far away. And they spoke to a lady there. It seemed like they'd woke her up. And she just informed them that the Air Force didn't deal with this kind of thing anymore, and to phone the police, phone the sheriff's department. And it really annoyed them. So they said, they decided to go home again. Forget it. So they set off driving, and then again, when they were talking in the car, they said, "No, we'll pull in and we'll get another phone box and we'll phone the sheriff's department, which they did. And the sheriff said, look, where are you? We'll meet you. So the sheriff's department arranged to meet them close by. And then they escorted them back into the town. And at one point, just before they reached the police station, they stopped and they looked in the newspaper office windows because they didn't know what time it was. You know, these were fishermen. They didn't even have a watch. So they went to the sheriff's department and they both made a statement several times, told the sheriff everything. And at one point, what the sheriff did, he put both men in a room and left them there and said, I'll be back in a few minutes. What they didn't know is that the sheriff had left a secret tape recorder running. And he'd done this on purpose because the sheriff thought, now we'll get them. Now we'll find out what they're really up to, you know. And, of course, when he listened to the tape, they didn't say anything different. In fact, I think at one point they were, you know, almost praying. And they carried on their conversation about what had happened to them. So that convinced the sheriff that these two gentlemen were on the level. So, you know, eventually they made their way home and they went back to work the next day. They worked at the shipyard nearby. Now, somebody somewhere at the sheriff's department leaked the story. And it went around the world. I mean, these two gentlemen's life was turned upside down. And like I said, Dr. Alan Hynek, and I'm sure everybody's heard of, and Dr. Harder were on site within 48 hours. Dr. Harder tried hypnosis, but it didn't work too well because the men were extremely distressed. But at a press conference, you know, Dr. Hynek said, without a shadow of doubt, these two men were the genuine article. And he'd listened to the secret tape. The two gentlemen were totally unaware of it, even at this point. And off he went. So what they decided to do was take a couple of weeks off work until things died down. But it just made things worse because they were inundated. People would literally come up to Charlie Hickson's house, knock on his door. And it made their life hell. And Calvin Parker, he used to live sometime with Charlie. He kind of got out of the way, and you know, he went home. But a few weeks later, he ended up in hospital with a nervous breakdown. So that's the sort of the bare bones of the story, if you like, Jim. And it's one that always stayed with me. And earlier in the year, in 2017, I mean, I have a copy of the book, which was published by Wendell Stevens back in 1983. And I was flicking through it, and I went online, and you can obtain a second-hand copy here and there, but they are an extortionate price. And I just thought, well, if I can get the permission, I'd like to republish it myself. And it's one of those cases, I think, Jim, that at the time was a landmark incident. I mean, Charles Hickson went on to do a few speaking engagements. I think he went on the Dick Cavett show. And he believed, did Charlie, that he should go out there and tell people what happened. But Calvin had the opposite reaction. He tended to shy away from it. Bearing in mind he was a lot younger, he'd been much more psychologically affected by the whole incident. So whilst the book does detail accounts from both gentlemen, it's mainly based on Charlie. Now, the co-author of the book is a chap called William Mendez. He was a college professor, and he saw Charlie on the Dick Cavett show, and it intrigued him. But to begin with, he didn't believe him. So he invited Charlie to come and lecture at the college where he was. And he still didn't totally believe him, but he decided to look into it. And the book is like 3 years of work. There's Charlie's further sightings. He had a number of other sightings down the years. William Mendez dismisses a couple of them. However, there's one of them where the whole family is involved, which is pretty difficult to dismiss. They underwent hypnosis, both gentlemen. All of that is detailed, word for word in a lot of places, Jim. And of course, the secret tape from the sheriff's department is there in the book, verbatim, word for word. The only thing I've done differently in the book is at the back, I've put a list of audio files that you can access online and listen to these two gentlemen, which of course wasn't available back in 1983 when the book was originally published. And I felt vindicated in publishing the book, Jim, because initially I knew Charlie Hickson had passed away. I set out to try and find Calvin Parker. I was led to believe he was still alive and still living in the area. So I went to, I'm not going to mention any names, but it's a well-known UFO group in the States. They have an investigator in Mississippi. And I contacted him, and he'd never heard of the case. I mean, I was astonished. He never even heard of it. I was contacting him to see if he knew where Calvin Parker might be. He'd never even heard of them. So I thought, well, for me, it's been one of those classic cases that I grew up with that's been forgotten. And I felt, I'm now vindicated in publishing it. And hey presto, it's out there for all to see. It's illustrated. It's all the original illustrations. The only difference is the media audio files you can view online. And I put a little memoriam in the back to Mr. Hickson because he's sadly passed away. However, I did contact Calvin Parker. I did actually find him, and I'm hoping to be speaking to him again quite soon. But even just these last couple of days, Jim, I mean, I think you're going to be the first person I've told. I've even been in contact with Charlie Hickson's son. So, it'd be interesting to see if he will add some comment. I don't know if he will or not, but I've managed to contact him. And for me, the case is a classic. And if, with the greatest respect to all the other UFO researchers, for me, if Dr. Hynek says it's the genuine article, then that's good enough for me, But there's a lot more to it than that we can cram into 5 or 10 minutes. So, I felt vindicated for republishing the book, Jim, because it's for me it's been forgotten about, and I think it's a landmark case that we shouldn't forget our history in this subject, and this is something I'm trying to address in my own small way.
Well, this is a very good point, and actually, it it anticipated a question I had. In terms of the interest in UFOs and in terms of historic cases, I mean, of course, most of us have heard of Rendlesham. We've all heard of Roswell. We've heard of some of these watershed cases, the big few cases, but there seems to me that there's a great undercurrent of very significant cases over maybe the last 60, 70 years that are worth revisiting, but they've been basically forgotten to the mists of time. We have access to all of this information that's out there, but maybe some of the things, for example, things that, like this book, they were in print 30, 40, 50 years ago. Very significant, could be very educational, but not everything's been digitized and those kind of things. A lot of this has been lost to the mists of time because the original experiences are either incapacitated, or unfortunately some of them have passed away, or maybe they've kind of walked away from it and don't want to comment on it anymore. So a lot of these classic cases are in fact being lost to the mists of time. So I applaud what you've done.
Well, yeah, I mean, this particular book wasn't digitized at all. I mean, to publish it, I literally had to sit down and retype the whole manuscript. It wasn't in any kind of file at all. So there are a few typos in there, and they're all my fault. But so it was a labour of love in that respect. And if you think back as well, Jim, I mean, I dare say most, if not all, of your listeners are familiar with Travis Walton and
sure,
Fire in the Sky. But again, up until the release of the movie Fire in the Sky, there wasn't a lot of information available about the Walton case. Travis certainly wasn't on the speaker circuit a great deal until after the movie came out. So he's been a great flag bearer, for his own experience. But in this case, with the Pascagoula event, there was no flag bearer. And, it was being lost to the sands of time. And like you say, there's many more other things like that out there that for one reason or another, Jim, have been lost. And, people often ask me what is my best case, what's the one I'm interested in. And it's probably ones that you've never heard of. It's things I've investigated myself that didn't make the national headlines and things of that nature. So there's lots of that kind of thing as well. Also, in my early days at Flying Disc Press, it's not a coincidence that the first two books I published were from overseas. The first one was UFOs over Poland, and the second was UFOs over Romania. Simply because, again, I'd worked with the authors. They'd written a number of articles which were published in English, but the vast majority of their research hadn't previously been available in the English language. So that was the reason for publishing their two books. And we still have that barrier to face. Is the language barrier as well. So I'm trying to redress that again in my own small way when I can, and look at international authors as well. And if I can get them translated, then I will do. But like I said, when I contacted the UFO group in Mississippi, the state where this happened, and they had never even heard of it, I thought, well, I'm doing the right thing. So, the book is out there on Amazon.
So perhaps we can turn our attention to a case that I think has not been as lost to the mists of time and that people are certainly aware of, but I'm interested into any new insight, is the Rendlesham file, Britain's Roswell. We've had Colonel Charles Halt as a guest on the programs and so forth before, but I'm always interested in this case because there's so many tantalizing aspects to it. The involvement of the U.S. military and being near that installation where I think most people pretty sure that we had nuclear weapons there, and then the tantalizing tale of some of the witnesses saying that there were hieroglyphics on a craft, and maybe some disagreement amongst some of the different witnesses. What is your view on the Rendlesham case, and what does this book bring to the picture?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably Britain's best known case, simply by the fact that, again, it has a number of torchbearers, not just one or two. And the fact is that all of the witnesses that were involved, as far as we're aware, are still alive, Jim. You've mentioned a few of them there. Colonel Halt, Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, and others, many of whom have gone on the record, mainly Colonel Halt, Burroughs, and Penniston. But others have also added their input. And this happened in 1980. So, again, it was before the digital age. But it did make the headlines across the world a few years later. And it's an interesting case, Jim, because it's one you can kind of chart, if you like. And you can see, if you look at the bigger picture, you can see how it's, and I use this word, it's evolved. Because originally, and even in Colonel Halt's famous memo, it starts off with some strange lights seen in Rendlesham Forest. The forest lay between the two RAF bases of Bentwaters and Woodbridge, which, of course, back in 1980, although they were RAF bases, they were manned by the United States. And they were a nuclear facility. There's no question about it. It was the height of the Cold War. There was all kinds of fractions in Eastern Europe with the Soviet bloc. So, it has evolved. It began with a few strange lights in the woods, in Rendlesham Forest. And three US-based personnel, security personnel, were detached to go and have a look. And this is what it starts to bother me is right from the beginning. I'm not detracting from the case, Jim, but they thought it was a light aircraft that may have crashed. Now, I don't know about you, Jim, for me, if I thought an aeroplane would crash, I wouldn't be sending 3 security guards. I would be sending either the civilian emergency services, police,
Sure,
brigade, ambulance, or I'm sure the base have their own facilities because they have, 8-10 tank busters there at the time and various other things. So I'm sure they've got their own emergency services. So that kind of puzzled me. Why would they send 3 security guards? Anyway, they did. 2 of them went into the forest. One stayed with their vehicle. They saw the lights in the forest. They approached. And the story is that one of them, which is John Burroughs, he claimed to have seen a triangular object that had blue lights underneath and a red light on top, that he touched it and it was warm and smooth. He saw these, like you mentioned, these hieroglyphic markings on the side. But what is strange is his companion, his colleague, John Burroughs, who was standing just feet away, all he saw was some lights. And he didn't see his colleague touch it or walk around it. He just claims he saw some lights. This thing shot off into the forest. They tried to chase it for 20 minutes or half an hour and eventually gave up and were ordered back to base. And since that time, it has evolved down the years. It's got more and more complicated. There has been falling out, people disagreeing with each other. John Burroughs, at some point, I think it was just a few years ago, stated that when he touched the object, that he'd had this code downloaded into him that was a binary code. And when he got back to his apartment where he lived that night, he had to write them down, and he wrote page after page after page of zeros and ones. Didn't know it was binary code then. That's since been deciphered, and it gives you various compass points or locations around the Earth. And there's supposed to be a book coming out about that. So and he thinks it's a time machine from our future. Colonel Holt, on the other hand, he went out on a separate night. Colonel Holt was the day after was on the base at a post-Christmas dinner, and he was told that the UFO had returned. So he thought, right, I'll go and put a stop to this nonsense once and for all. Took a party of men out into the forest, and of course, he recorded parts of it on his dictaphone that he carried, which has been made public. He saw strange lights, strange things in the forest, beams of light coming down, pencil beams like laser beams towards his feet, others that were in the general direction of the weapons storage area. And Colonel Holt's gone on the record that he believes it was, not of this earth. So there's a series of events over a couple of nights. You also have Larry Warren, who claims that there was a third night where, the commanding officer of the base, a British commander, was there, and this craft came down in a place called Capel Green, which is a large field now, and, entities were observed and so on. A lot of argument surrounding Larry Warren and his account, but there's a lot of arguing about all of it, if we're honest. And the book that I've published, The Rendlesham File, is by a gentleman called Andrew Pike. Andrew's an astronomer. He's an astrophysicist. He's not a debunker. He used to write a regular column for UFO magazine here in the UK. That was published by the late Graham Birdsall, for example. So he's not out to debunk the case. It's a huge, great tome. He published it himself about 10 years back. When I say published, I think he gave a few copies away. So I volunteered to publish it for him at the end of this 2017. He updated the book. It's a huge, great tome. It's over 700 pages, but it's an easy read. It flows well. And his conclusion is that it's not a time machine from the future, certainly not aliens. he thinks it could be one of two things, that it may be some kind of secret test or testing that was being done at the time by the military, and or it's a very rarely understood natural phenomena currently not recognized by science that is termed an earthlight, or earthlights in this occasion. So he gives a full timeline. He's done his research. He's investigated the case, spoken to some of the witnesses. And like I said, he's not a debunker. He's not out to say none of this happened. This is just his own professional take on it. So you can read the book and either agree with him or disagree with him. You know, I really don't know what took place there, Jim. You know, I have problems with small parts of it. And I have no doubt that the two gentlemen, Burroughs and Pennington, who entered the forest, did have some kind of anomalous experience, Jim. I really do. But, you know, there are things that don't add up. But then perhaps with so many people being involved, I think we might be suspicious if everything did add up, because people perceive things differently. They remember things differently. So, but it's one of those cases that's not going to go away. You know, Nick Pope is a big supporter of the case, because Nick did a cold case review when he worked at the Ministry of Defence, and he's convinced it is a genuine UFO case, and a very significant one, if not the most significant of ones so far. Whether that's his opinion on that has changed since the revelations in the New York Times, I'm not so sure. But like I said, the one thing about Rendlesham is that all the witnesses are still alive, Jim. You know, we often talk about Roswell. I'm not sure if there's anybody left alive who was a first-hand witness at Roswell. I don't know. But all the airmen at Bentwaters and Woodbridge, they're still around. And it doesn't surprise me. There was an announcement in the showbiz magazine Variety, again towards the end of 2017, that a script has been prepared for a 3-part drama series based on the encounters at Rendlesham Forest. So it'll be interesting to see if that gets made, and if it does, you know, what slant they take on it and how they portray it. But, you know, one thing's for sure, the discussions about Rendlesham is going to continue. And there's no sign of it letting up yet, Jim.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating case, and I think that it seems to me that it does make sense to call it Britain's Roswell, in fact. As we close out on this call for 2018, what do you see in the horizon? Do you see more revelations? It seems to me, and I just was talking to another UFO researcher today as we record these shows. We record ahead of time, so it may be a while until this is out, but it seems like we're on the cusp of maybe kind of seismic shift in some ways, in that more revelations are supposed to come out. Hopefully those will be reported in the mainstream media, which I think is so important. But in the lean years I've been looking at this, just the last 13 years or so, it seems like to me that there's more potential for kind of seismic shifts than we've seen in years. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with you, Jim. I mean, when it comes back to the New York Times item, you look into that, and two things stick out in my mind is the amount of money they spent is $22 million, I believe. Not a great amount of money when it comes to the overall defense budget of the United States.
Oh, no.
But they haven't paid $22 million, Jim, for 2 pieces of film, you know. And if you look at towards the end of the article, it did mention that they had recovered material from these events. So there's a whole bunch of questions there. Also, again, if you want to be a bit cynical, go back to the New York Times. They were astounded, you know, at the attention that this article got. I think there was several thousand comments, you know, left online when they published the article. So just being from a newspaper point of view, we have to remember that newspapers are there to sell newspapers. So
yes,
from a newspaper point of view, from a journalistic point of view, if there's another story to be had, they're not going to let it go. this is theirs to have. They're working with people like Leslie Keane. I think she's to be congratulated in her and what she's done in all this. So I would not hesitate to say, Jim, that hold your breath, because there's more to come. When? I don't know, but I don't think it will be that long. Because I know for a fact that the Freedom of Information requests have already been filed at the Department of Defense and so on. That's not going to let up. And so I would expect, certainly in the first quarter of 2018, we'll see something else. Whether it will be as staggering as what was released, who knows? Perhaps it surpassed that, Jim. But stand by for takeoff. I think we've only just got to the countdown.
I agree. I think a lot of exciting times are on the way. And Philip, thank you so much for telling us about these two projects your company has, and also your thoughts on all of these new kind of disclosures and where we're headed. And I think it's very important to let people know, where can they find more information about your work and that of Flying Disc Press?
Yeah, I mean, just find me on Facebook, Philip Mantle or Flying Disc Press. And if you just put Flying Disc Press in Google, you'll find my blog, no problem. If anyone's got any questions or any information, I'll gladly, correspond with them. No problem at all, Jim. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being a guest on the show today, Philip.
My pleasure.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that show as much as I did, and it was a lot of fun speaking with Xaviant and Philip. And I must say, it seems like there's a revitalization of the UFO area with all of the different revelations that have been coming up through the news, and I'm confident there's going to be more coming in 2018. It'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen. Probably, I would say, the richest period of mainstream reporting on the subject, probably since the 1950s. Very exciting indeed. I hope you'll stay with us, because we'll continue to follow and talk about those developments with our guests. Thank you so much for joining us on the Paranormal Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time. Tell a friend, subscribe in Apple Podcasts, rate and review us, and please keep listening. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.